And I'm sure he does, because he's got to use this part of his brain for the rest of that comes natural. So imagine being in a relationship. How many people see Amy and Sheldon on the show? Okay, their relationship consists of a contract. Okay, and I can't remember, like they're going to go on a date once a year, and all these little things, and hold hands, and you know, so for them, you know, it's difficult. And if there's a book, Looking in the Eyes, and then he wrote a second book, John Elder Robinson, I think is the guy's name. And if you ever have a chance to read it or listen to it on audio, it's a really good book. But anyway, he's the most of us probably recognize or remember the group Kiss. All right. Okay. He designed the guitars for Kiss. He's the guy in the Autism stuff. He designed the flames and the lights. Super smart guy. Socially, didn't get it. He was married a couple times. But he goes through the book of explaining I know I need to do this. When my wife comes in and does this, when my son does this, I have to do it. He's ruled it. He understands the rules, but he doesn't really understand why he does it, but he knows if he doesn't do it, he's in trouble, right? So, but it's a really great book because he talks about the struggles he has with work, with life, and you know, and he did this job for KISS, which was pretty cool, and then he did some other job, and people had a hard time working with him, but he was so brilliant they just worked with him, right? So it's pretty smart guy. So I'll just show you a couple things, and then I'll open up for questions. So there's a book, Thinking in Pictures, Temple Grandin's book. Some kids on the spectrum often actually think in pictures. They view the world in pictures, and I'm trying to give an example. Well, you know a stop sign without actually reading the words, right? You can tell backwards. So we're actually can be pretty visual, but they can view the world very visually. So one of the things that can help them is using visual supports for kids. So here's one good example of visual support. I guess I have the screen over here too. So here, this is a quick thing. It says first, then. So this is a when, then statement. It's a visual support. Obviously, this is for a kid. And first, arrows point to the one. Then, right, then two. And here, first he's got to go to the bathroom. Then he gets to go outside, right? Now, can you see one of them's kind of hanging off there a little bit? You guys see that? It's kind of dangling, and underneath it says bathroom. So what he used to say is first go to the bathroom, or first go to recess and then go to the bathroom, okay? So guess what would happen when he came off recess? He wouldn't go to the bathroom, all right? So they swapped him. So guess what he did? There's Velcro on there. Switches. Yeah, turn around, it's like, I don't know, I'll just move him back, right? So it worked. He was smart. He was no communication, 0 words, right? He could sign. Anyway, so this is an example of a visual support for kids. And visual supports work for lots of people. And visual support could also be a checklist, but that's more words. So kids get caught up on lots of words. So it's important to know. But anyway, it's a win then. But this kid was smart enough to realize, okay, I got to do this. But the teacher thought, oh, I'll Velcro this, right? Because this is all laminated. Well, he's like, oh no, you don't. And so he swapped them, right? So they had a battle over this. So the teacher would move it, and guess what he would do? He'd move right back. And the teacher would move it, he'd move right back. So anyway, the point about part of that is when you put a lot of efforts into interventions, I should say just do the easiest first. Don't put a lot of sparklies in it and stars and all this kind of stuff, because most of the time it gets ripped and torn. It doesn't work the first time, so you got to tweak it. Okay. I'll show you a couple other examples here. So this is a book we made for a kid. And when I get mad, I can. And each page had something on it, and they were Velcroed on there. And after we taught him, this took probably 4 weeks to use this, he would actually go look at the book, flip through all the pages. First, he wouldn't look at the book. Then he'd look at the book. And then he'd flip through the page and say, I'm not going to do anything. And then after 4 weeks, he finally would flip through the pages, pick something, and go do it. And that's what we had to teach him. And it was really difficult to teach him. We spent hours teaching this one skill. Hours. Because he was a pretty aggressive kid. So I want to talk about adults that I've worked with a little bit too. this goes into lots of other things. So I worked with adults in their 40s and 50s that finally come to me, or somebody said, hey Brett, you got to see this person. So I see them, sure enough, they're on the autism spectrum. And for their whole life, they've tried to figure out, they can't figure out relationships. I can't hold a job. Right? My kids don't understand me. I don't understand my kids. And one adult, I remember I was working with her, and after we had met several times, very bright lady, had several degrees. It made the world of difference for her to understand this stuff of my brain works different. I see the world differently. And guess what, for her birthday, right? So everybody comes over to her house for her birthday. She bakes her own birthday cake, right? And her friends had to say, no, it's your birthday. We do this for you, right? It was hard for her, but her friends were very accepting. Because once they found out, too, that she had a disability or a challenge, I just want to call it a challenge, and her brain worked differently, she really had to work. They worked with her to help her understand what all the social stuff was. She almost lost her job, actually. And after I worked with her a little bit and worked with a couple other people, they adjusted her job a little bit and just understood she's just a little different. She's a little quirky, and that's okay. And she was really good at her job. She was really good at paperwork. She checked all the boxes. I mean, when people came in and did an audit, they never had to worry about her stuff at all. Never had to worry about it at all. So there's a lot of strengths good with it, but she didn't figure out until age 47 or something that her world was a little different. So one of the reason why we kind of did this during Autism Awareness Month is these kids are out there. The current, I just read something the other day of 1 in 50. So when I first started doing this, 15 years ago, it was like 1 in 1,000. Okay. And the big question I get is, why is it worse, right? And what's that?
More awareness.
And I think that's part of it. I think we're much, we look back at Einstein and there's a few other people way back when. I think we're better at assessing things. But there's a lot of controversy over vaccinations and several other things. But some of us we just don't know. There's a genetic link, they believe, between that and kids on the autism spectrum, individuals on the autism spectrum. Actually, when they're born, the placenta actually has developed differently. So there's some research on that. I thought that was really fascinating. My doctor, I said, can I get a slice of my son's placenta? The doctor's like, what? I said, well, let me tell you what I do for a living. And so, and I kind of thought to myself, well, does it really matter? It doesn't really matter. But I thought it would just be interesting to know. But what they've done with some of it is the folds within the placenta actually are different on kids with autism than those without. Which is really interesting. And of course, they need to replicate the study. There's a couple more studies where they talked about actually in utero, the baby actually starts to develop differently. And there's some genetic abnormalities that predispose the person to autism. Then, somewhere in life, something triggers that, usually at a young age, okay, and then it comes out. And I just read something yesterday about this microdeletion of a certain chromosome, and I'm not a neurologist, but I wish I kind of was, but I think that'd be a very boring job. So the kids actually are missing certain parts, or there's certain parts that are altered on the genetic chromosome. So and I have parents who come to me and say, what did I do wrong? Right? What did I do wrong? Did I not do this right? And I say, we don't know. I don't know, but they actually believe when the kid's actually developing or something there. We're exposed to more chemicals. Mothers actually have high levels of BPA in their bloodstream. So most of the BPA is plastic, and they've actually changed lots of plastic so it doesn't have that chemical in it anymore. So there's lots of things. The chemicals on the seats you're sitting on, probably Scotch Guard, Teflon. It's hard to know. So I get lots of those questions, and I won't debate whether it's one or the other, but I can tell you the research really supports lots of things. So we don't know for sure. So most of the time it develops, but you can usually tell by the age of 3. Kids usually, you can identify kids before the age of 3 most of the time. Most of the time they don't get identified until 4, 5, 6, or in a couple cases 40s. And so if I think about it, if you go to your pediatrician, how long is the pediatrician visit?
20 minutes maybe.
Maybe 20 minutes, right? Okay. 20 minutes is not long enough, okay? And it's just the way the system is. So sometimes what I encourage parents to do is, if you have a concern, if you know something that's a concern, you have to go back, and you have to go back, and you have to go back, and you have to go back. So if you find out at age, because about age, at 1 year or 18 months, you can usually get a diagnosis most of the time. But early intervention is key the first 3 years. And most pediatricians, it was a couple years ago, 80% of pediatricians missed a diagnosis for autism on kids. And most of the time told parents, just wait, right? Just wait, it'll grow. Just wait, it'll grow. Just wait. And by the time age 4 or 5, you're kind of in this like, oh man. And I can tell you there's some parents in here I know, like, that's what they were told. Okay. Now, and I think, okay, what do we do with that now? But I think pediatricians are much smarter now. They're doing a lot more things. But the office visit, it's really important to be a good advocate for the kids you work with and the kid that you have. Because the only person that's going to advocate for them the best is you. Okay, they're going to get another teacher, you're going to move, you might get another job, you might be in a different school district. Okay, so you have to be an advocate for your kid. So
just a quick question. So
sure.
What's the difference between, my child was diagnosed with ADHD, ODD, and SID. Okay. So what's the difference where everybody is saying, oh, that's so overrated, it's so overdiagnosed, to now, you know, autism spectrum is down to 1 in 50 kids? I mean, are we looking at the same kind of thing? To where the spectrum is now so big that these kids with any kind of personality issue
and go through fads. So RAD, reactive attachment, ADHD, bipolar. I can tell you, kids who go to certain places always will come back with bipolar. So sometimes I have parents who come and I'll do assessments. I don't do as many QLC. I usually refer them to QLC because they do a much better assessment. It's more comprehensive. And if they don't get that diagnosis, they'll shop around till they find somebody like that. And I can give them the same one. And I'll look at QLC stuff because I was like, can you look at all the stuff? I'll kind of do a screening and I'll do part of the assessment and I'm like, I really think this is a valid assessment. So sometimes it's, I think we want a solution to what's happening, you know? And in the medical world, if you have strep throat, you go to the doctor, you take a test, you get it in 5 minutes, you go down to the pharmacy, you get medication in 5 minutes, and within 24, 48 hours, you're good to go, right? So I think part of it is the way our society is a little bit. And
I mean, I know I'm told by people that will look at me and say, well, you know, if you just would have whooped him more, if you would have spanked him,
yeah, you know, I hear that all the time, and I'm like, their brain. I did this training for this other agency, and there were some people. I was trying to convince them the brain is wired different. It works differently. Now sometimes they get it all together, and they're like, okay, you did it yesterday, but why can't you do it today? Right? Sometimes they're typical kids, and they're gonna play you. Okay? And sometimes they're gonna be a teenager, and they're gonna try and get away with stuff. Right? But that's hard to tell what the line is. But I hear it all the time, if you just spank them more and all that, and that does not work. It usually makes things 1,000 times worse. Yeah, and then kids usually end up being more aggressive. And then when I usually come in and kids are super aggressive. There's not a kid I've ever turned down, and I've gone to some rural schools and worked with some really aggressive. I've been hit, punched, spit on, bit, rib cracked, glasses broken, kicked. I mean, you name it, it's happened to me. So, but I'm a big guy, so it's like, all right. But I was wearing a brace, but I took it off. So I fell on the only patch of ice in my driveway. So, plus then I'm getting old. So, but that's a good question. I think here's the other part with autism spectrum disorders. Often come along oppositional defiant disorder. There's one, ADHD, and there seems to be a link between those two. Anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, and I've seen bipolar disorder in there. And the big question, people are like, what is it really? And I'm like, okay, to me it doesn't really matter what it is because I know what the interventions we need to put in place. With bipolar, certain meds, and ADHD, certain meds, and that's not my job. But the interventions I do for those kids are the same, whether, you know, because the behaviors are similar, have similar things. And I always try to figure out how the kid's brain's working, what we got to do about it.
Because I know, I mean, if you label a kid with ADHD anymore, it's almost common. But if you label them with autism and they're in school, then it's, oh my gosh, that's the weird kid. You know, that's the kid that has autism. And it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of the way the ADHD used to be. So now it's kind of...
It is, and I think part of it, think part of it is kind of a fad, a little bit. But if you get a good eval, good comprehensive eval, and I talked about speech, OT, PT, and you pull all that together,